I guess you could say I was a typical workaholic. My name is Caden. I'm 35 years old, and I run a growing financial firm. My days are spent in back-to-back meetings, conference calls, and endless negotiations. When you're constantly juggling high-stakes deals, there isn't much room for anything else. Certainly not for your marriage. I didn't even realize it at the time, but everything was falling apart around me. I remember when I met Emilio. She was stunning, beautiful, intelligent, and incredibly ambitious. We met early on in our marriage, and at first, it was perfect. She was driven in her own right, always involved in charity events, social causes, trying to make the world a better place. We'd talk for hours, share our dreams, make plans for the future. But slowly, things changed. I was so focused on my work that I failed to notice the little things. The lack of warmth in her eyes when we spoke, the silence at dinner, the absence of her laughter. At first, I thought it was just stress. After all, she was involved in so many projects. But eventually, I realized she was pulling away, and I, stupidly, thought it was just a phase. One evening, I came home late after a deal that I thought would be the breakthrough I needed. I was exhausted, and I barely noticed her. She was sitting in the living room, scrolling through her phone, barely looking up when I came in. I dropped my bag and flopped onto the couch. "Emilio, we need to talk," I said, trying to break the silence. She didn't look up, just murmured, "Later, Caden. I'm tired." That was the start. I didn't see it at the time, but there was something off. I'd been so wrapped up in work that I didn't notice the small changes at first. Her schedule started shifting. She started going out more, staying out late for meetings and charity events, though I knew nothing about them. She wouldn't tell me anything, and I didn't press her. Work was more important, right? But in hindsight, I see how she started distancing herself, slipping further and further away from me. It wasn't until one particular evening that everything began to unravel. I'd come home early for once, intending to surprise her. But as soon as I opened the door, something felt wrong. I could hear the soft chime of her phone ringing from the kitchen, and when I walked in, there it was, her phone face up on the counter. A message popped up from Grayson Gale. Now, Grayson was a name I'd heard a few times, but I never paid much attention. He was a politician, a man always in the spotlight. Charismatic, with a knack for getting things done. But he wasn't my concern. Emilio was. I shouldn't have read the message, but I did. "Can't wait to see you later, Grayson," it said, with a winking emoji. I felt a jolt in my chest, like I'd been sucker punched. The words were nothing overt, nothing too blatant, but something about them felt wrong. My first instinct was to confront her, to throw the phone at her and demand answers. But I didn't. I couldn't. I was paralyzed, frozen in this uncomfortable limbo. Instead, I slipped the phone back onto the counter, made some excuse about being tired, and went to bed. The next few days were a blur of confusion. I kept telling myself it was nothing, that I was overreacting. But deep down, I knew. I knew something was happening, something I wasn't part of. I tried to bury the feeling, but Emilio kept pulling away, and I kept ignoring it. Work became my excuse to not deal with the tension at home. After all, if I was going to save our marriage, I had to focus on the business, right? I told myself that over and over. Then there was Sarah, Emilio's best friend. She'd always been there, the loyal confidant. But even she seemed to notice the shift. One day, after yet another night of silence between Emilio and me, Sarah casually pulled me aside at a party. "Caden," she said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "I don't want to say anything, but have you noticed how often Emilio's out lately? With Grayson?" I froze. Grayson's name again. I didn't know what to say. Instead, I just nodded, trying to pretend it didn't bother me. But I could tell Sarah knew. I could tell she was worried. "I think you should talk to her," she added, her voice low. But I didn't want to hear it. I couldn't face it. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about what Sarah had said, about the message from Grayson, about how Emilio was becoming more distant every day. And then, I remembered the other things. Her constant work trips, the late nights, the unexplained absences. I didn't want to admit it, but I knew. It was just the beginning, though. The cracks were there, but I wasn't ready to see them. I was still too focused on everything else, still too lost in my own world. But I knew the day was coming when I couldn't ignore it anymore. Little did I know, that day would come much sooner than I ever imagined. And when it did, I would wish I had paid more attention to the signs. But that's a story for later. The moment I saw them together again, something inside me broke. It was at a charity gala, one of those high-profile events I'd been too busy to attend. I'd promised Emilio I would make it, but of course, work had to come first. She went without me, and in hindsight, that's when everything started to fall apart. I wasn't even supposed to be there. I had just finished an exhausting meeting and decided to stop by the event unannounced. I told myself I wasn't looking for anything, but when I walked through those doors and saw Emilio and Grayson standing too close, my stomach churned. They were laughing, a little too comfortably. Her hand rested on his arm as they spoke, their faces inches apart, exchanging glances that were anything but innocent. I took out my phone and snapped a few pictures from across the room. In the back of my mind, I could hear a voice saying, "This is it." This was the confirmation I had been dreading. Later, when I looked at the photos more closely, the intimate smiles, the way their eyes locked, it was clear. This wasn't some innocent friendship. They were together, no doubt about it. But I wasn't done yet. I needed more than just these pictures to confront her. I spent the next few days digging into their relationship. I hacked into her phone, something I had never thought I'd do, but the desperation took over. I found a treasure trove of messages between her and Grayson. Plans, secret meetings, even a mention of a future together, a life that didn't include me. One message, in particular, stuck with me. After everything is in place, we can finally live the life we've always talked about. It was clear she was planning her escape. From me. From everything we built together. I didn't want to believe it at first. I told myself maybe there was a misunderstanding, that maybe it wasn't what it looked like. But deep down, I knew it was. I knew what I had to do. I decided to confront her, to face this head-on. It was time for the truth to come out, whether she was ready for it or not. I organized a meeting, a private dinner at a quiet restaurant, just the two of us. I wanted her to have nowhere to hide, nowhere to run. When she walked in, she looked the same as she always did. Flawless, poised, her makeup perfect. She didn't know what was coming. As we sat down, I didn't waste time with small talk. I slid the phone across the table, the pictures, the messages. "You want to explain this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She went pale, but she quickly tried to recover. "Caden, she paused, her eyes flicking between the photos and my face, trying to find an escape. "This isn't what you think." I cut her off. "Don't lie to me. I've seen everything. The messages, the plans. I know about you and Grayson." Her eyes hardened then, and for the first time in months, she really looked at me. "You don't understand," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I didn't get anything from you. You were always too busy. I needed someone who saw me, who listened to me. And Grayson offered me that. Is that it? You're throwing everything away because of that?" I demanded, my anger rising. She shifted in her seat, her hands trembling slightly. "I'm not throwing anything away. I'm starting over. I've been stuck with you, Caden. You were never really there for me. It's not just about him. It's about me, my life, my future. I'm tired of being ignored." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was as if the woman I married, the woman who once promised me everything, was suddenly a stranger. I felt sick. "I gave you everything," I said, my voice cracking. "I worked for this, for us, and you threw it all away for him. For a politician. A man who probably doesn't care about you as much as you think." She didn't say anything for a long moment. When she finally spoke, it was almost a whisper. "I don't care anymore." That's when the anger hit me. I had been trying so hard to hold it together, to find a solution, but there was no fixing this. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't even remorseful. "I think it's time for you to leave," I said, standing up and throwing my napkin onto the table. The confrontation didn't end there. We spent hours in the restaurant, arguing, shouting, and crying. But it was clear. There was nothing left to salvage. I didn't file for divorce right away. I wanted something more. I wanted revenge. I wanted her to feel the consequences of what she'd done. And I knew exactly how to make that happen. I reached out to Greta Larson, a media mogul I had met years ago through business. She had connections all over the media world. I explained the situation, and she was more than eager to help. I provided her with everything: the photos, the messages, the recordings of our arguments. It was a goldmine for any tabloid, and I knew she would make sure it went public. But that wasn't enough. I needed more. So I began meeting with Tess, a woman I'd met at a party a few weeks earlier. She was young, attractive, and, most importantly, willing. I wasn't looking for a relationship, but I knew Emilio would hate the idea of me moving on. So I used Tess to provoke her, to make her jealous. I could already picture the look on her face when the media found out about Tess and me. I also started working with my lawyer, Michael. A seasoned expert in high-profile divorces, he had been by my side through all the twists and turns of my career. He was eager to help me plot the perfect strategy for the public fallout. As for Grayson, I knew I needed to take him down too. I arranged fake interviews where he denied everything, claiming there was no affair. I fed information to my old friend, Mark, a journalist who worked for a tabloid. Mark was more than happy to help expose the lies and the secrets. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. Not after everything. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about making sure she understood the cost of betraying me. And when the world found out what she had done, when everything came crashing down around her, I'd be there, watching it all unfold. But the real question was, how would she handle it? The moment I posted that message on social media, I knew it was only a matter of time before everything exploded. I kept it short, calm, unemotional, nothing too dramatic. But the message spoke volumes. After careful consideration, I've decided to file for divorce. My wife, Emilio, has betrayed me with Grayson Gale, a politician I once considered a friend. Our relationship has irreparably broken down due to her actions. I didn't add anything else. No salacious details. Just the truth. But that truth was enough to make it a media frenzy. The post went viral almost instantly. I watched the comments flood in, people sharing it, speculating about every tiny detail of my life. Suddenly, my name was all over the news. My business, my finances, everything I'd worked so hard for was now a part of the public spectacle. But none of that mattered. All that mattered was that Emilio was finally exposed. Grayson, of course, tried to distance himself from the situation as quickly as he could. His PR team issued a statement. There is no involvement from Grayson Gale in Caden's divorce. He and Emilio have a professional relationship and nothing beyond that. I could feel my pulse rising as I read his statement. He was trying to wash his hands of it, acting as if everything was just some kind of misunderstanding, but I wasn't about to let him get away with it. I knew what I had, the photos, the texts, the evidence, and I made sure it all came to light. Through media leaks, interviews, and my ally Greta, who was more than happy to spread the word, it became impossible for Grayson to deny his involvement. Every day, new details came out. I had photos of Emilio and Grayson together at events, images that had been taken by various onlookers. I released the text messages, showing the intimate plans they had made. At first, people seemed skeptical, but the more they saw, the more they understood. There was no denying it. They were having an affair. And the worst part? Emilio couldn't escape the fallout. As the scandal spread, I watched as the walls closed in on her. At first, she tried to put on a brave face, publicly denying everything. She kept insisting that it was all just a misunderstanding, that she had done nothing wrong. But the public pressure was suffocating. She started getting calls from friends, some of whom I hadn't even known she was close to, telling her they couldn't support her anymore. Sarah, her best friend, was one of the first to distance herself. I couldn't help but feel a small sense of satisfaction as I saw the fallout. Sarah had always been a part of Emilio's life. They'd shared everything, confided in each other. But even Sarah couldn't stand by her now. Greta organized a press conference to make sure the public knew everything. I spoke first, calmly outlining the timeline of events, explaining how Emilio had betrayed me and the evidence I had against her. There was no denying it now. The press ate it up, and for Emilio, it was a nightmare. Every time she tried to speak, she dug herself deeper. At one point, she even tried to claim that Grayson was nothing more than a good friend. But the damage had already been done. She was exposed. And when the reporters pressed her on the details, she fell apart. Her attempts to explain her actions only made things worse. The more she denied it, the less believable she became. People didn't want to hear excuses. They wanted answers. And she couldn't give them any. I could see the emotional toll it was taking on her. I knew she was struggling, but part of me didn't care. This was her punishment, after all. The betrayal, the lies. She needed to feel the weight of it. The public spectacle was only the beginning. Then came the first court hearing. The room was packed. Lawyers, journalists, photographers. Everyone was there to see the drama unfold. I knew this would be a long fight, but I was prepared. Michael, my lawyer, had been hard at work gathering all the evidence. We had recordings of her phone calls with Grayson, messages from her to him detailing plans, even footage from the charity events where they'd met. Every piece of evidence pointed to one thing. Emilio had been unfaithful, and she was trying to cover it up. As we entered the courtroom, I could feel the weight of the situation. The judge was fair, asking all the right questions, but there was no escaping the truth. Emilio tried to argue that she was the victim, that she was neglected and misunderstood. She talked about how I was always working and how Grayson had given her the attention she felt she deserved. But none of it mattered. The facts were clear. She had been seeing Grayson in secret, lying to me, hiding the truth. Her lawyer, Nicole, tried her best to deflect. She threw out arguments about how the media had distorted the truth, how the evidence wasn't conclusive. But every time they tried to spin the story, I countered with more proof. I had messages. I had receipts. And most importantly, I had the truth on my side. When Emilio tried to deny her relationship with Grayson again, the court didn't believe her. They saw through the lies. The media coverage, the photos, everything was overwhelming. It became impossible for her to continue the charade. As the hearing came to a close, I knew this wasn't just about the divorce anymore. It was about winning. It was about making sure Emilio understood the consequences of what she had done. And the truth was out. It wasn't just a divorce anymore. It was a public humiliation. But for Emilio, the worst was yet to come. The divorce trial had reached its boiling point. With every passing day, the stakes grew higher, and I could feel the weight of it all. Emilio's reputation, already battered from the media frenzy, was on the line. The pressure of the trial was suffocating for her, and the more she struggled, the more I could see her unraveling. I had come prepared. Michael, my lawyer, had worked tirelessly to build a case, and now it was time to bring the full force of our evidence to bear. One of my most strategic moves was hiring Sarah, Emilio's former friend, as a witness. She was reluctant at first, but I knew she'd be crucial. She had always been close to Emilio, and the truth was she knew more than she had let on. When Sarah took the stand, the room fell silent. She hesitated before speaking, clearly uncomfortable. But once she started, it was impossible to ignore the weight of her testimony. She described how Emilio had confided in her about her growing feelings for Grayson, about their secret meetings. Emilio had never mentioned any of this to her, yet Sarah confirmed that their relationship had been ongoing for months. That was a pivotal moment. The court, the media, everyone saw that this wasn't just a random fling. This was a deliberate, calculated betrayal. The truth was coming out piece by piece, and it was becoming harder for Emilio to maintain her innocence. Then came the video. Michael presented footage from several public events, including a high-profile gala where Emilio and Grayson were caught on camera, their physical closeness undeniable. They weren't just talking. They were in each other's personal space, their body language intimate. The media jumped on it immediately, broadcasting the footage on national television. I could see Emilio's face flush as she realized just how damaging this evidence was. But the most shocking moment came when Tess, the woman I had used to provoke jealousy in Emilio, was brought forward. She had been a pawn in my game, but now she was speaking out about the emotional manipulation Emilio had subjected her to. Tess revealed that Emilio had confided in her about her strained marriage, about how she had sought solace in Grayson. The courtroom was stunned. Tess's testimony made it clear that Emilio's betrayal wasn't just about Grayson. It was about her own unhappiness, her own desperation for validation. She had taken solace in a man who was already tied to my family, a man who was supposed to be a friend. Tess's words cut through the courtroom like a knife, and I could see Emilio's composure falter. But even Grayson wasn't spared. He issued a statement claiming that his relationship with Emilio had been a mistake, that he never intended to hurt anyone. It was a desperate attempt to salvage his reputation, but it only made things worse. His supporters started turning on him, questioning his integrity. The public saw him as just another player in the mess, and his image took a massive hit. He was no longer the untouchable politician he once was. With every passing day, Emilio's world was crumbling. The public fallout was swift and unforgiving. Her every move was dissected by the media, and the more they learned, the more they turned against her. It wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about the political scandal, the betrayal of not only her husband, but also the people who had trusted her. Her reputation and her future were in ruins. Greta Larson, ever the media mogul, had been documenting every moment of the trial. She aired a series of interviews with me, showcasing my calm, collected demeanor in the face of the chaos. I spoke about my decision to expose the truth, about my desire to protect my family's integrity. The public ate it up. I came across as composed, dignified, and in control of the situation. Meanwhile, Emilio's public breakdown continued. The more she tried to defend herself, the more she sank deeper into the hole she had dug. At one point, the court heard about more lies Emilio had told. She had misled people about the nature of her relationship with Grayson. She had denied everything, tried to spin the story to make herself look like the victim. But the evidence was overwhelming, and as each new detail came to light, the public began to see her for who she really was, a woman who had betrayed both her marriage and her social standing. The emotional and psychological toll on Emilio was becoming too much to bear. Her friends, once loyal to her, began pulling away. Alice, her close friend, began to distance herself, as did Sarah. They may still have felt some sympathy for her, but they couldn't ignore the magnitude of her betrayal. With each passing day, she became more isolated, and the pressure continued to mount. But the worst was yet to come. The final court decision was the end of it all. After weeks of testimony, evidence, and media coverage, the judge finally made his ruling. The courtroom was silent as the judge spoke. In light of the evidence presented, I find in favor of the plaintiff, Caden. Full custody of Maya is awarded to the plaintiff. All joint assets, including the business ventures, are also awarded to the plaintiff. The defendant's request for alimony is denied, as her actions were a contributing factor to the breakdown of the marriage. I could feel the weight of the decision settle over me. I had one, but it wasn't just about the material things. It was about the sense of justice, the sense that the truth had prevailed. The judge's ruling was a vindication of everything I had exposed. The media, sensing the finality of it all, rallied behind me. They took the court's decision as an endorsement of my version of events. People across the country saw it as a triumph of integrity over betrayal. I had taken a mess of a situation and turned it into a public spectacle, and now I was emerging victorious. For Emilio, it was the end. Her public image was shattered. She was left with nothing. No alimony. No business. No support. And as for Maya, she was coming home with me. I was going to make sure she was okay. I looked over at my father, Edwards, who had been silent throughout most of the trial. Now, as a character witness, he spoke out in support of me. He talked about the impact of the affair on our family, and his words lent me added credibility in the eyes of the media. I had one, but the real battle was just beginning. The days after the trial were a blur of emotion, reflection, and rebuilding. Emilio, once the center of a whirlwind of social events and political connections, was now left with nothing. Her name was Mud. The life she had once imagined, full of glamour, high society, and power, was nothing more than a distant memory. I couldn't help but feel a small sense of satisfaction as I watched her disappear from the public eye. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice. She had betrayed me, and now she was paying the price. Her career prospects were non-existent, and the doors that had once opened so easily to her were now slammed shut. Her friends, once loyal to her side, began pulling away. Alice, Sarah, all of them avoided her. It wasn't out of malice, not exactly. They didn't want to be associated with someone so publicly disgraced. I think they all felt that if they stood too close, they'd get dragged down with her. Even Sarah, the friend who had once tried to warn her, reached out, but only to say goodbye. "I'm sorry, Emilio. You've made your bed, and now you'll have to lie in it," she told her. It was the final straw. Emilio had lost not just me, but everyone who mattered. There were a few supportive messages, sure, from people who didn't know the full story, people who still saw her as a victim. But they were few and far between. And each one only highlighted the reality that the majority of people saw her as the villain in this drama. Grayson's involvement, as I had suspected, was deteriorating rapidly. He realized that his political career was on the line, that the affair had made him a target. He distanced himself from Emilio as quickly as he could. I saw his public statements trying to deflect blame, claiming it was all a mistake, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. His supporters began to abandon him. The affair had tarnished both of them, and there was no escape from it. Emilio retreated to a small apartment in a less affluent part of town, far away from the world she had once known. The apartment was a far cry from the luxurious home we had shared. The irony wasn't lost on me. She had gone from the cusp of political greatness to a complete pariah. As the weeks went by, I could sense her pulling further away from reality, spending most of her time alone. She'd occasionally look back at her life, trying to hold on to the memory of what she had lost, but I could tell it was slipping through her fingers. The thrill of the affair had been temporary, but the consequences would be permanent. As for me, things were different. My reputation had emerged unscathed. The media, the public, they saw me as the man who had been wronged but had handled it with dignity and strength. I had proven that I could overcome the worst betrayal and come out on top. People admired my composure, my resolve, and that felt good. But there was more than just public approval. The court ruling had granted me everything: custody of Maya, our assets, and the opportunity to rebuild. I focused on my business, expanding operations, investing in new ventures. My firm flourished, and with each passing day, I felt more in control of my future. I became a mentor to young entrepreneurs, helping them navigate the same cutthroat world that I had conquered. I also started a quiet relationship with Tess. She had been a part of my life in the aftermath of the divorce, and though it started out slowly, we grew close. Tess understood the need for privacy and discretion. She knew the importance of keeping things out of the public eye. After everything, I had learned the hard way just how precious privacy was. I'd always been a man of strategy, but now I was playing a different kind of game. I was focused on rebuilding, on securing a future that was mine and Maya's. I wanted her to grow up in a stable, loving home, far from the chaos and heartache of the past few months. But even with all the success, I knew it wasn't just about business or money. It was about peace. It was about moving forward. I took a moment to reflect on the journey I had undergone. The pain of betrayal, the heartbreak, the chaos of the divorce. All of it had been overwhelming. But now, in the calm that followed, I felt a sense of catharsis. I had achieved justice. I had done it not just for myself, but for Maya. She deserved stability, love, and the chance to grow up without the emotional scars of our fractured relationship. I thought about Emilio. I wondered if she had any sense of remorse. Did she regret the affair? Was the temporary thrill worth the complete destruction of her life? She had lost everything. Her career, her friends, her reputation, and most importantly, her family. I could only hope that she had learned something from it, though I doubted it. As I sat on the park bench, watching Maya play with a group of children, I felt at peace. The future was bright. We were starting fresh, and I had come through this ordeal stronger than I had ever imagined. The wreckage of my marriage didn't define me anymore. It was just a part of my past, a chapter that was closing for good. Maya ran over to me, a bright smile on her face. "Look, Daddy, I made a new friend," she exclaimed, holding up her hand to show me a small stuffed animal one of the other kids had given her. I smiled, my heart full. "That's great, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you." I knew then that the worst was behind me. We were going to be okay. More than okay. I had triumphed.